and I'll hand over to Stuart. After Stuart's shown the video, by the way, we will have a Q&A and where Emma and I will ask questions, but please feel free to ask questions as well, whether you write them in the comments or whether you join us afterwards with questions. That would be great. And thank you very much. Over to Stuart.
Okay. Excuse me. Good afternoon, everybody. The main thrust of this short presentation is the making of lace bobbins. I'm not a lace maker. I'm not very good at identifying box lace from Nottingham lace and so on, but I know a reasonable amount about bobbins and their making. So what I'm going to do is show a 19-minute long video that I made recently for the Woodlanders scheme, and then I'm quite happy to answer questions that might turn up. So I'm going to share screen now. So there we go. Screen. That's nothing to do with lace making. That's a red admiral that I photographed during the summer. But we'll go straight into the video, which it really was. So there we are. It appears that lace making originated in Italy and then swept all the way through Europe. Certainly places like Brussels, Malta, Gozo, and areas in France became particularly famous for their various individual styles of lace, some finer than others, but it was all in great demand. The only problem with making lace is that you need lots of these bobbins, and you also need a lot of time just to produce a very small amount. One of the first mentions of lace making in England is from our old friend Shakespeare, when a duke called Orsino from the 12th Night states, "The free maids that weave their thread with bones." And these are the bones that Orsino was talking about. They would be mutton bone, and they were each individually threaded and would hang from a pillow, and then those fair maids would do their magic, weaving those threads into lace. And of course, lace was so popular for several centuries with the aristocracy and royalty. My main interest is in the bobbins themselves, and by studying antique examples we can come to the conclusion that the earliest bobbins were turned on a bow lathe, and we can trace bow lathes back almost 4,000 years in history. And quite interestingly, that they were still being used into fairly recent times, but of course a bow lathe was very simple, and anyone could make one. Not everyone could use one, and it was almost certain the fact that the people that turned these bobbins were bobbin turners. They weren't necessarily jobbing turners or general turners. I think when we study these bobbins, they take a great deal of skill, and there would have been such a high demand for them that a craftsman could make hopefully a reasonable living concentrating just on the bobbins. But later on, when foot treadle lathes became in general use, certainly towards the end of the 18th century and well into the 19th century, we know by studying the bobbins again that many of them would have been turned using the lathe. These beads, which are there to give added weight to the thread, are called spangles, and are more commonly found on the Bedfordshire and the East Midlands bobbins, whereas the self-bucks variety relied on rather chunkier, heavier bobbins. They're called bucks thumpers. That one's decorated, as you can see, with spots. That's called a leopard. There are all sorts of varieties. This one has pewter rings. It's still a bit of a mystery how those rings were applied. These are really early bucks thumpers, probably dating from the 18th century. The reason that we can tell that they're early is because we know that they were turned using a bow lathe, because we have the indentation at each end where it was put into the lathe and held by the two centres. Some bobbins, particularly the bone bobbins, have inscriptions or names on them. This one says George, and was almost certainly a present from George to a girlfriend or to his wife, a little love token if you like. And this one probably likewise, it just says beauty. I have here a boxwood turned early bobbin, probably round about late 18th century, and unusually it has a captive ring. Wood turners will be familiar with this little device, and almost certainly in that gap there and that gap there, there would have been two others. The physical indication that we have that some of these early bobbins were turned on a bow lathe is the fact that they have an indentation at both ends of the bobbin where it has been spun between centres.
Captivating, but not quite hard. You have to across it as a separate thing. And then bring it across underneath the capture print. Cut it so you get a loose ring.
Well, that's all there is to it, really. Okay, that's a particularly complicated bobbin, known as a mother and babe for obvious reasons, or sometimes a cow and calf. Not a cow in calf, a cow and calf. But I hope that's enlightened you a little bit. I'll, from this point, welcome any questions that you may well have.
Oh, thank you so much, Stuart. That was incredible to watch. It was really relaxing as well. I think I need to put it on again later when I'm getting stressed out.
Yeah, you could nod off. You could nod off to the music. It's true.
No, it's terrific. I don't really. There's so many questions I've got. Shall I start and then others join in? First of all, just trying to understand about Bucks itself. Was Bucks lace particularly well regarded, or did each rural area have their own sort of lace making industry?
Yeah, though, as I said in the video, there are all sorts of variety of lace, some much finer than others. I'm not an expert on the lace itself, but I think it's fair to say that lace made in Honiton, therefore Honiton lace, and they used a very different type of bobbin to the ones that we used in this region, was probably the very finest. Whether, I think you would need to ask a real expert as to whether Bucks lace was. I think the black Bucks lace was very popular, evidently. This is not sure where that would go on a piece of clothing, but this is Honiton, and you can see it is extremely fine. And I don't think our Buckinghamshire lace quite came up to that standard. This, I believe, is a piece of Bucks lace. This is from the 30s. It's a silk handkerchief with a typical lace, handmade bobbin lace border.
Beautiful again. So was it our wood then, Stuart, that dictated the type of bobbins we made, and in turn our trees, our local trees? Or
yeah, well, obviously you don't need a great deal of wood to make any particular bobbin. So you could actually use firewood. You can use bits and pieces from the local hedgerow, from the orchard, bearing in mind that almost certainly these would have been turned while the wood was green. While wood is green, that is freshly cut,
still full of sap. It is much softer and easier to turn, in much the same way as our chair bodgers use green wood to turn the chair legs for the same reason. I mean, there's a whole range of local woods that you can find. That leopard there is boxwood. I've just picked up one here, and that's yew tree with a boxwood top, very much like the one I turned, although it's fixed. So there's no miniature bobbin in that. If you want a dark wood, then usually it'll be something like plum or damson. There's a plum bobbin there with an unusually long neck for some reason. And this one, the rolling all over the place. This one's interesting to me because it's the only one I've come across of that design, and this was from a Chesham lace maker. And I'll hold it a little closer. You may find that you may see that it's got little dots on it. They were actually burnt in by acid using nitric acid or aquafortis, which was used as a stain for wood, but obviously not a very user-friendly material. And I've still got, so I bought this from many years ago when I was busy collecting these bobbins from a Mrs. Abbott from Chesham. So that might, and she lived on the Berkhamsted road, but quite a finely turned bobbin that. But what I can't say is whether that was very much a Chesham style or turned on the whim of a very experienced wood turner. And because Chesham was the centre of the woodware industry, going back possibly further than the Wycombe chair making industry, I think we could take the woodware industry in Chesham back almost 400 years, making all sorts of woodware, whether it was wooden shovels, wooden spoons, dairyware, wooden bowls. We also know they made wooden shovels which were identical to those found on the Mary Rose. When I examined the Mary Rose shovels and those in Chesham, there was no discernible difference. So I like to think maybe that the shovel makers of Chesham supplied those that were found on Henry VIII's flagship, the Mary Rose. Anyway, I've diverted already from bobbins.
Oh no, thank you, Sue. That was brilliant. I love the bit about there being love tokens and the stories they could have told us as well. The names on there and things. That was lovely. Have you any more unusual?
Some of them were love tokens. Some of them, well, that's the one with George on. Some of them were actually commemorative, but they didn't always commemorate happy events. Sometimes, because up until the early 19th century, you know, we were still having public hangings, which attracted large crowds, and there were bobbin makers who exploited this by making commemorative bobbins celebrating the hanging of a particular local felon, and they were also usually the bone type bobbin and with the message engraved.
Well, that's dark. I have to look at our collection and see what we've got here. And so, the different patterns that you get in the bobbins, would different makers have done one particular pattern, or would they have done a variety? Or how
yes, it's been quite difficult, and I've not done any work on this, but Christine and David Springett, who used to run lace classes, lace days, used to sell antique bobbins, and David in particular did a lot of research into bobbin makers, not always easy to find in the archives, and he did identify a number of individual bobbin makers purely on the style of their particular bobbin. And I think it's covered in one of his books. It might be The Romance of the Lace Pillow or something like that. But the Springett books are really worth reading up if you're interested in the subject. I've got several sets of bobbins which are so similar to each other. They're almost certainly from the same maker, but obviously they never ever signed the bobbins, and so we have absolutely no idea which the individual makers were. And the chances are, if they were ever, their occupation was recorded, the chances are it's recorded as wood turner rather than bobbin maker, in much the same way as the chair bodgers were. They were never, on the census they were never called chair bodgers, they were always called chair turners. And to be honest, it's not easy to turn a chair on a lathe, just the legs. And
would it have been an expensive purchase for the lace makers?
Obviously, if you just look at a simple box thumper, no, you could turn that very quickly, and I imagine that would be quite a cheap purchase. But of course, you needed sometimes up to 70 or 80 on a pillow, and so number-wise, that could add up. But once you've got bobbins, they didn't wear out. You were unlucky if you lost one, and also as the old lace makers became retired or blind, or certainly couldn't work anymore, then their bobbins, their second-hand bobbins, would be in demand as well. So that's another way that you could purchase the bobbins. But certainly when you go to the bone bobbins, or the more intricate ones, yes, they would be relatively expensive, and you wouldn't have many of those on a pillow. In South Bucks, I mean, most of them might be your plain box thumpers, but you might have a special one that someone bought you. Maybe your husband's bought one that says, "Love you, Bluebell," or something, that would stand out.
So anyone else want to join in with the questions? I don't want to. Okay, so just unmute yourself and ask a question of Stuart. We'd love that.
Well, what I will point out, I bought this little box of bobbins. There were 32 bobbins in here in the early 1970s. Bought them from an antique dealer. But this little bobbin box is absolutely typical of the late 18th, early 19th century. And it's got these lovely little wire hinges. So if you ever come across a box like that, it's probably not going to have its bobbins, but that may well have been made purely to keep your bobbins in.
Oh, lovely.
This one's made of walnut.
I've got a question. Actually, I have a couple. So I was wondering, the production of lace bobbins, did it ever become more industrialized? Because I went to I believe it's an English heritage property in the Lake District that supplied Manchester for all of their bobbins for cotton weaving. And that was a whole huge affair, very specialist machinery.
Yeah, A similar thing happened with bobbin lace towards the end of the 18th, well, I suppose more into the early 19th century, when and based on the the cotton spinning machines and weaving machines from further north. In Nottingham, they designed machines for making lace, machine-made lace, and this really was the death knell of bobbin lace making, because obviously they could churn it out very much quicker. It was still pretty attractive, and you know, most purchases are guided by price. That made handmade bobbin lace redundant fairly quickly, and as that declined, other niche crafts came into being to replace it, such as straw plat for the Luton hat industry, and in Holmer Green and surrounding villages, that then became superseded after cheap imports, I believe from China, made the straw plat industry unviable locally, and a lot of it was done certainly around our general area, Amersham, Chesham, Holmer Green, High Wycombe. So something called tambour beading then took its place, and then roulet work. Quite happily cover tambour beading in a similar presentation on another day. Nothing lasts forever, unfortunately. We can say that about chair making, although the chair bodgers were busy for a couple of 100 years turning out chair legs. You know, by the certainly by the just before the Second World War and just after, made legs was so cheap and quick to produce. There was no demand for legs turned on the more archaic and slow pole lathe. So all through history, the old pendulum swings one way, then another. Things come in and out of fashion, and it's true, fashion plays a part. You can imagine from Shakespeare's period all through the Elizabethan period, they loved all their lace and their frills and their cravats and all the rest of it. No place for frilly lace these days, unfortunately.
Yeah, perhaps the wedding industry.
Yeah.
I'm also wondering how did you get interested in bobbins? Because I mean, the world of lace is not a big world anyway, and the world of bobbins must be even smaller. So where does your sort of come in this area? Is it
my introduction to bobbins wasn't the fact that I was particularly interested in lace making, although I've been interested in all local crafts. I suppose my first line of interest was while I was still at school, my father being a chair maker and having a workshop working with wood, so I was interested in all aspects of woodworking. I then became interested in the history of chair making, which again included the chair bodgers and wood turning, and then rural crafts, whether it was gypsy crafts or hurdle makers or broom makers. And because lace making was a local craft, and the main tools, and bobbins are a tool, were made of wood, beautifully designed, and using local materials from hedgerow and orchard, that also became an interest of mine. I could never give you a date from when I first became interested in this and that. These things just grow, don't they? Much like the wood, pretty slowly sometimes. And I I also, as many of you know, I started making miniature chairs in the 60s, which I turned into a business. And I started demonstrating the pole lathe at shows, and then lecturing to WIs about various crafts. So I started making a living from my knowledge and my expertise, and ended up traveling the world just talking about this sort of thing, really. So it's been pretty good to me.
So can you recognise a buck's thumper if you're travelling? Would you?
Yes.
And
this is, sorry, this is a bone of contention I have with the museum, because on your travelling bus, which I think is fantastic, the bobbins that you have on show are absolute rubbish. They don't represent any region in England. They've probably been donated by an amateur wood turner, but I'm only guessing there. What you should be displaying for the public to handle are our bucks thumpers. These are the bobbins that would have been used around Amersham, Chesham, Wycombe. So these are bobbins from our area, and eminently recognisable, whereas the bobbins that you have on your bus display are much thinner, more like the East Midland bobbins and the Bedfordshire bobbins, but they're not even that either. So,
Yeah,
sorry to have to say that.
No, not at all. I guess that's because what's out in the handling collection is not considered as valuable as what's in the museum collection. But we perhaps need to get hold of some bucks, additional bucks thumpers for the handling collection, then, don't we?
To be honest, if you go on eBay, bobbins used to be very expensive. Unfortunately, well, or fortunately, you can pick up second-hand, a collection of second-hand bobbins, including our bucks thumpers, very, very cheaply, and so that purchasing them that way would give you only need half a dozen for your hand in the collection. If you lost the odd one, it wouldn't matter, and you wouldn't be losing them from your permanent collection, which is probably better recorded.
Well, luckily we've got Emma with us, our collections manager, so she'll be on the case.
Absolutely.
We'll get her on the case. That's great to know.
Yeah, but before I go, if I can just share screen once more, I just want to show you this one image. There she is. I'll just open this. Now, this is an engraving that I purchased in I purchased it over 30 years ago, but it was only published in 18. Oh, okay. It says there's nothing there. Well, we know there is.
Just lost it. You had it a minute ago.
Yeah, I know. It's the computer doing silly things. So but we'll go there again. So this was published. I won't try to zoom in, but that is a bucks lady with her bucks pillow on her lap, with bucks thumpers on the pillow. Very different from the very thin and more ornate bobbins used around Bedfordshire and further up. This is the sort of thing you would be looking for, and I just think that's a fantastic illustration.
That's
I love how
great.
she's got a patch on her apron as well.
Oh yes.
Clearly not wearing the lace.
Also, there's a I've got a, here she is. This is Emma Smith, taken about 1909. Now she's very local. Emma lived at Winchmore Hill, and she's got about 12 inches, 14 inches of lace border. No doubt that's bucks lace. And again, she I found just zoom in there. Typical box thumpers. Now she's still doing this. She's obviously because lace making after it became uneconomic became very much a hobby. But it's possible at this time that Emma was really at the end of commercial lace making. But you can see there's really no fancy bobbins on her pillar at all. And look at the number of pins that she's having to use, because that's a fairly complicated. And I just noticed there's a pillow, another pillow there as well. You've probably got this picture in your collection. It was one taken by Dr. Morley Davis, who took a lot of local pictures.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen it in colour before. It's lovely to see it in colour.
That I coloured using what they call artificial intelligence.
It looks great though.
It's not
It's life. It works really well. So come on, team. We need some questions. Anyone else want to join?
I have a question for Stuart. How would the bobbins be distributed if it was professional bobbin makers? Because all the villages are very isolated.
That's true. Well, in two ways. Imagine individual bobbin turners would attend the various markets in the market towns. That would be one way. The other way would be supplying bobbins wholesale, or maybe sale or return, we'll never know, to the agents or the dealers. The dealers that were working as agents for the rag trade up in London, where they sold the lace on and obviously took their cut, and those dealers, one imagines, could also supply the bobbins that were supplied to them to the lace makers.
Up in the dealers in High
Yeah,
Wycombe,
thank you.
they talk about the pricking
Anyone else?
and the silks, but not the bobbins being supplied.
So I didn't catch the question.
Sorry, I just said that the lace dealers up in High Wycombe, they talk about providing the prickings and the linen or silk for and the pins, but they don't talk about supplying lace bobbins.
No, and it may be that the bobbin makers, obviously they'd be better off selling them without a middleman taking a cut. It is quite likely, and if I was a bobbin turner, this is what I would do. I would attend the Friday or market or whenever it was, and sell direct to the lace making public. But it is only speculation, because I have never come across any reference. Finding a reference at all to, specifically to a bobbin maker is almost impossible.
Stuart, did your father make any if he was a wood turner?
No, my father wasn't a wood turner. He was a wood machinist and chair maker.
Okay.
But he never ever used a lathe, no.
So would it have been fairly specialist? People would just make bobbins?
I think that is the case. Any good wood turner can turn bobbins, but if you specialise in something, you can turn them quicker, therefore cheaper, and maybe get more of a captive market. And my feeling is that lace bobbin makers or lace bobbin turners, on the whole, would have been specialists, and that's what they would have done primarily for their living. That's not to say that, as I said earlier, a good turner could make them, obviously, but I think it generally it was a more specialist craft of it on its own.
So fantastic. Presumably you need good eyesight as well, because it's quite fine. Like the lace making itself, it's quite fine work, isn't it?
Well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Would they have used different bobbins for black lace versus white or cream or blonde lace?
Did you ask whether the bobbins for making black lace were different from the making ordinary white lace?
Yes.
Yeah. No, there's no reason why there should be, because your bobbins hung on a cord, well, on a thread, so they never got lost within a piece of black lace. No, they'd have just been the ordinary bobbins. I mean, the fact that whether you made white lace or black lace made no difference to the bobbins you used.
And the different shapes of the bobbins, Stuart, does that relate to the pattern, or is that purely?
No, that purely is mostly regional.
Yeah.
And the patterns on them illustrates very often the whim of the turner, provided that's still a practical bobbin. But because when particularly the thin of the East Midland ones, there's a huge variety of decoration, and that's just illustrating the work of a particular turner.
Right. So the pattern itself comes from the pins, nothing to do with the bobbin. They just
Exactly, yeah. Because when you're making lace, you have a pricking, as you're probably aware. Yeah. So that's what your pins go in, and when you see the light through.
oh yeah.
Get that in the light. I've lost it now. I can't see.
You angle it back a bit. That's it. We can
There
see
we are.
the back. There you go.
So yeah. So you would draw out the pattern, and the pins for the thread would go in each hole as and when it's necessary, and you just flung the bobbins over it. I do have about a 60-second video of lace being made. It's completely unedited, but before I go, I'll quite happily play that.
Yeah.
You can then see the process. This is completely unedited, so I'll try and get rid of the noise in the background. There we are. So you can see the pins that are in the pricking. That brown parchment is the pricking. Yeah, we know that. Go away. There we are. And these are all buck thumpers. But watching that's the process is still a complete mystery to me, as it is to most people.
But what would the cow and calf bobbin that you showed us being made then? Why was that needed? The extra little.
Well, they would have been made as a special gift, because it obviously that's going to take 4 times as long as any other bobbin. So they would have been special bobbins bought as a gift for special occasions, and because it's showing off the expertise of the turner, and because it's expensive, not every lace maker would be able to afford one, but she would be proud to have it as a gift. And they are, even today, extremely rare from a collector's point of view. And of course, very often you'll get the bobbin that's lost it's lost its original babe. But now that's interesting. Anyway, that's something different. I've just pulled that off of the bottom there, and there's some thread on there, but that's a bit of a mystery. Anyway, I've not got one. I've only got the ones that that I've made. I've never been lucky enough to find an antique one.
And is there a market? Is there a real collector's market for these bobbins?
Not as they used to be. I mean, bone bobbins you could pay up to £50 each for them now. Sad to say, you can get a collection of lace bobbins very cheaply, as I say, on eBay. So I mean, if I was looking for antique bobbins, that's where I would go.
Well, it's been absolutely fascinating, hasn't it, Emma? Really interesting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And I know you offered to do more for us on different topics, so we'd really appreciate
I'm not going away anytime soon, so you know where I am.
Thank
Anyway,
you.
cheers for now.
Thank you. Anyone else before we go? Any last minute questions, or should we say goodbye to Stuart and thank you all very much for joining us? Well, someone, Tim.
Just a little note.
Yeah.
Leslie doesn't do it anymore, but I just thought I'd show you a lot of cheap bobbins.
Yeah.
Any
Very cheap.
bumpers in there, Tim?
No.
Oh, lovely though.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm going to say cheerio for now.
Lovely. Thank you so much.
I'll see you again in the future.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you
Okay,
everyone
bye.
for joining us today.
You're welcome. Bye.